Hey everyone, welcome back. I love a good deep dive into power, and you guys sent in some really interesting stuff this time.
Yeah, this is quite the collection.
We've got Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power. We've got some fables, historical biographies. It's going to get
Yeah, a lot of juicy stuff to unpack here.
so much to learn about how power is used, how it works, and maybe even a few insights on how to use it ourselves.
What I find really fascinating about all these sources you sent in is that they challenge our simplistic ideas about power.
Yeah.
It's not just about brute force or authority. It's this very subtle dance of psychology, strategy, influence.
Okay, I love it. Let's unpack that. And, one thing that all of these sources really emphasize is the importance of really understanding people. There's this quote from Balthazar Gracian, a 17th century thinker, that really stuck with me. He said, "Many people spend time studying the properties of animals or herbs. How much more important it would be to study those of people with whom we must live or die."
Gracian was right on the money there. Decoding human behavior, understanding motivations, that's really the key to wielding power effectively. You need to see beyond the surface,
Mhm.
beyond the masks that people wear and grasp those hidden motives.
Totally. And I mean, that brings us to the concept of deception, which is like a major thread throughout a lot of this source material.
Mm.
Take the story of Basilius. He was this guy who climbed the ranks of the Byzantine court.
Yeah.
You know, supposedly the emperor's closest confidant. But behind the scenes, he was using a mix of flattery, manipulation, even, eliminating rivals to secure his position.
Oh, yeah. Basilius is a perfect example of how power dynamics play out, even in those seemingly close relationships. He recognized the emperor's insecurities, played on them masterfully, all while maintaining that facade of loyalty and devotion.
So it's a real chess game. You got to plan your moves, understand your opponent's weaknesses, and then use them to your advantage.
It is. And what's interesting, too, is he recognizes the need to adapt. Early on, he builds trust. Then he strategically deploys flattery and cunning to eliminate potential threats, ensuring his rise to power.
But then it makes you wonder, where's the line, right? Where do we draw the line between strategy and just flat out manipulation?
Yeah, that's a question that's plagued thinkers for centuries,
Right.
and it's definitely something to keep in mind as we delve deeper into these 48 laws of power. Let's start with Law 1. Never outshine the master. It sounds counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but Greene argues that making your superiors feel insecure is a quick path to self-sabotage. Instead, aim to make them feel smarter, more capable.
Okay, so it's about playing the long game, making yourself indispensable without threatening their ego.
Precisely. A historical example of this. Emperor Augustus, who succeeded Julius Caesar. Instead of trying to erase Caesar's legacy, Augustus cleverly built upon it, honoring Caesar's memory while subtly establishing his own authority.
It's like almost a judo move, using your opponent's strength against them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the sources also caution against, getting too close. Specifically, they warn against hiring friends.
Suggesting that gratitude can quickly turn into resentment and really put a strain on the relationship.
It really comes down to the delicate balance of favors and indebtedness.
Yeah.
When friends become employees, that feeling of owing someone, especially a friend, can sour the relationship.
Right.
Goodwill turns into resentment. That imbalance of power can really erode the foundation of friendship.
Totally. And speaking of friends and enemies, Mao Zedong had an interesting perspective on this. He believed in the necessity of enemies for growth, like going as far as turning friends into enemies just to solidify his cause.
Hmm. Well, Mao's perspective, definitely controversial, but it does highlight a strategic use of conflict. He understood the power of defining us versus them, solidifying group identity and purpose through opposition.
Yeah.
Of course, raises some ethical questions, but it shows how conflict, if managed strategically, can be a tool for consolidating power. Just something to think about. It is, and I think, that leads us really well into Law 3 of the 48 Laws of Power, which is conceal your intentions. So it's like having a poker face for power dynamics.
Exactly. Keep them guessing so they can't defend against what they don't see coming.
Exactly.
Think about Bismarck. He publicly supported a peace treaty that he actually despised. Why? It was a calculated move to gain political leverage.
Playing the long game there.
Wow, that's playing the long game. Sacrificing short-term satisfaction for long-term gains.
Right.
It reminds me of the story of Giesel and the boxing match, where the whole performance of this boxer was just a distraction to hide the real value of this lodge that was being sold.
Ah, that's Law 4 in action. Always say less than necessary. It's all about using calculated silence to create that aura of mystery and intrigue. So in the story of Giesel, that spectacle, that boxing match, it diverted attention,
Yeah.
allowed the true value of the lodge to remain hidden. It's like a magician's sleight of hand, directing attention where you want it to go. It makes you realize how easily we get distracted by shiny objects,
Hmm.
literally and figuratively.
Right.
And then there's the story of Haile Selassie, who used feigned hospitality to completely disarm his rival, Balcha, while he was secretly disarming all of his troops.
Talk about a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Talk about it. The Haile Selassie's tactic that embodies Law of Five.
Mm,
So much depends on reputation, guard it with your life.
yeah.
He built this reputation for hospitality, and he used that to lull his opponent into a false sense of security. It's that misdirection that allowed him to maneuver from a position of weakness and ultimately turn the tables on his adversary.
Yeah.
Powerful demonstration of how reputation can be a strategic weapon.
And it goes back to, like, appearances can be deceiving,
Yeah.
especially in these kind of power dynamic situations. It makes you wonder, how can you even tell when someone's being genuinely friendly or when they're, like, playing this power game?
That is the million-dollar question.
Mm.
Requires a keen sense of observation, understanding human behavior, and a healthy dose of skepticism. But building on that idea of appearances, let's move to Law 6, court attention at all cost. So it's about standing out from the crowd, making a splash. It makes me think of P.T. Barnum,
Oh,
the
yeah.
master showman. He knew how to create spectacle, capture people's imaginations, and that gave him enormous influence.
Barnum was a genius at understanding and leveraging what Greene calls the economics of attention.
Yeah.
He said, every crowd has a silver lining. He understood that in a world overflowing with information, attention becomes a valuable currency.
Totally. And I mean, speaking of standing out, Mata Hari, she cultivated this air of mystery, exoticism, even, embellishing parts of her story to become this sensation.
Right.
It shows how crafting a captivating persona can be so powerful for attracting attention and influence.
Absolutely. Mata Hari's story highlights Law 7. Get others to do the work for you, but always take the credit. She leveraged the public's fascination with the exotic, used it to build her brand, but it also demonstrates the potential pitfalls of this approach.
Yeah.
Relying solely on image and fabricated narratives can backfire if the truth is revealed.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that, like, while image is important, true power really needs a solid foundation. Speaking of which, I remember reading in one of the sources about how using knowledge, historical examples, can make you appear more intelligent and insightful.
Absolutely. That's Law 8. Make other people come to you. Use bait if necessary. Bismarck beautifully illustrated this when he said, "Fools say that they learn by experience. I prefer to profit by others' experience." He recognized that knowledge is power, but projecting an aura of knowledge is influential as well.
So is it about actual knowledge then, or just like appearing knowledgeable? Can you fake it till you make it when it comes to power?
Hmm. Well, while a deep understanding of your field is invaluable, the ability to convey that knowledge convincingly is crucial for influence.
Mhm.
Think about a charismatic professor who can bring even the most complex topics to life. Their passion, their eloquence, it draws you in, makes you eager to learn.
So it's a performance then.
In a way, yes, but it has to be grounded in genuine understanding. A shallow facade that's going to crumble under scrutiny.
Okay, so it's like substance over style, but style helps
Yeah,
too. All
exactly.
right, well, while we're talking about knowledge and expertise, Law 9 is win through your actions, never through argument. So what's that all about?
This law really emphasizes the importance of letting your results speak for themselves. Words can be persuasive, but actions have a much more profound impact. Think of a leader who consistently delivers on their promises. Their track record builds trust. It earns them respect, making them a force to be reckoned with.
It's like walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly.
Right.
Now, shifting gears a bit, the sources also caution against getting swept up in other people's emotional dramas.
Yeah. Law 10, infection. Avoid the unhappy and unlucky. It's like emotional vampires, right? They
Mm.
drain your energy and your focus. The story of Shang Yu and Liu Bang comes to mind. Shang repeatedly showed mercy to this rival, which ultimately led to his downfall.
Yeah, Shang Yu's story, that's a harsh lesson in the ruthlessness of power dynamics. It illustrates that compassion, while a virtue, can be a strategic disadvantage, especially when dealing with those who might exploit it.
Yeah, it's tough, but I see the point. So we talked about the dangers of getting too close, but what about, like, the opposite? Isolating yourself completely seems equally risky.
Mm-mm. You've hit on another key principle, balance. Law 11, learn to keep people dependent on you. It's about cultivating indispensability. making yourself so valuable that others have a vested interest in your success.
That makes me think of the story of Pontormo, the artist whose fear of human contact actually ended up hurting his career. He became so isolated that his work suffered. He lost all perspective.
Right. Pontormo's story highlights the importance of strategic connection.
Yeah.
While maintaining your unique vision is crucial, collaboration and feedback, essential for growth and influence.
It's like that dance between independence and connection. You need to be engaged but also protect your autonomy. Not become too reliant on any one person or group.
You got it. And that brings us to a fascinating example of strategic aloofness. Queen Elizabeth I. She brilliantly used the allure of marriage as leverage,
Right.
remaining unmarried but keeping potential suitors vying for her attention.
Playing them like a fiddle.
Exactly. This ties into Law 12. Use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your victim. Her strategic aloofness created this sense of scarcity and desire. By withholding commitment, she maintained control, turning the tables on those who sought to control her.
That's so smart. It reminds me of Alcibiades, the Greek statesman. He, expertly played different factions against each other by never fully committing to any one side. And then there's Henry Kissinger, offering his services to both presidential candidates, Nixon and Humphrey, to secure his position.
Both Alcibiades and Kissinger understood Law 13. When asking for help, appeal to people's self-interest, never to their mercy or gratitude. They recognize that self-interest is a powerful motivator, and they framed their requests in a way that benefited the other party.
Makes you realize these people are playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of chess, Law 14, pose as a friend, work as a spy. It's all about gathering intel, right?
Precisely. Utilizing social situations to your advantage. So, art dealer Joseph Duveen, for example, he meticulously researched Andrew Mellon's tastes before approaching him. This gave Duveen a strategic edge because he was able to offer Mellon exactly what he desired.
It's like doing your homework before a big meeting, you know?
Yeah.
You want to know their preferences, their strengths, their weaknesses, inside and out.
Exactly. And we see a similar approach with Fan Seng, who used his understanding of human nature to, accurately predict his rival's moves. It's like having a crystal ball for human behavior.
That's amazing. I mean, it makes you wonder, how can we all get better at, reading people and anticipating their actions?
It's a combination of observation, experience, and understanding those psychological principles. The more you study human behavior, interact with different personalities, the better you become at recognizing patterns and predicting responses.
So it's like learning a new language. You got to immerse yourself in the culture and practice speaking it to become fluent.
Excellent analogy. Now let's move on to a slightly darker aspect of power dynamics. The creation of a following. Law 15. Crush your enemy. Totally.
Whoa, okay, that took a turn.
It highlights the importance of decisive action. Greene argues that leaving a wounded enemy creates a potential for revenge. He uses the example of Caesar Borgia, who crushed his enemies completely, eliminating any chance of future uprisings.
It's like those nature documentaries where a predator takes down its prey swiftly and efficiently. No room for escape.
It's a bit harsh, but it illustrates the need for decisiveness in the realm of power. Sometimes hesitation or half measures can backfire, leaving you vulnerable to counterattacks.
So it's about striking with precision and force when necessary.
Exactly. Now, on a lighter note, Law 16 is use absence to increase respect and honor.
Okay, that sounds like a paradox. How can you gain respect by disappearing?
It's about the power of scarcity. When we're constantly present, our value can diminish. But when we withdraw strategically, it creates a sense of longing and anticipation.
Oh, it's like a limited edition item. The rarer it is, the more desirable it becomes.
Precisely. Coco Chanel, the legendary fashion designer, understood this principle perfectly. She said, "Fashion is not something that exists in dresses only. Fashion is in the sky, in the street. Fashion has to do with ideas, the way we live, what is happening."
She was a master at creating that sense of exclusivity and desire around her brand.
Exactly. Now let's move on to Law 17. Keep others in suspended terror. Cultivate an air of unpredictability.
Ooh, this sounds like a recipe for anxiety.
It's about using unpredictability as a strategic advantage. When people can't predict your actions, it creates a sense of unease and apprehension. They're constantly on edge, wondering what you'll do next.
It's like playing poker with a master bluffer. You never know what cards they're holding or what their next move will be.
Ivan the Terrible, the ruthless Russian Tsar, was a master of this tactic. He was known for his erratic behavior and his propensity for violence, which kept his subjects in a state of constant fear and submission.
Okay, that's a pretty extreme example. but it illustrates the power of unpredictability to control and influence others.
It's a powerful tool, but it's also one that should be used with caution. Too much unpredictability can lead to chaos and instability, which can ultimately undermine your power.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between being predictable and being unpredictable. Enough to keep people on their toes, but not so much that they lose all trust or confidence in you.
Exactly. Now let's move on to Law 18. Do not build fortresses to protect yourself. Isolation is dangerous.
Wait, doesn't that contradict the idea of strategic withdrawal that we talked about earlier?
It's not about physical isolation, but about avoiding social and intellectual isolation. Building a fortress metaphorically means shutting yourself off from feedback, collaboration, and the exchange of ideas.
So it's about staying connected to the world and being open to new ideas and perspectives.
Exactly. The story of Louis XIV, the Sun King, is a great example of the dangers of isolation. He built the magnificent Palace of Versailles, isolating himself from his people and surrounding himself with sycophants. This created an echo chamber that blinded him to the growing discontent among the populace, which ultimately contributed to the French Revolution.
It's a reminder that power requires perspective. You need to stay connected to the real world and be open to feedback, even if it's critical.
You've got it. Now let's move on to Law 19. Know who you're dealing with. Do not offend the wrong person.
Okay, that sounds like basic social intelligence.
It's more than just being polite. It's about understanding the power dynamics at play in any given situation and recognizing which individuals have the ability to help or harm you.
So it's about choosing your battles wisely.
Exactly. And it's also about knowing your audience. The same approach that might work with one person could backfire spectacularly with another.
It's like knowing when to play good cop and when to play bad cop, depending on the situation.
Excellent analogy. Now let's move on to Law 20. Do not commit to anyone.
This seems to contradict the idea of building alliances and cultivating relationships.
It's not about being a lone wolf, but about maintaining your independence and avoiding becoming beholden to any one person or group.
So it's about playing the field and keeping your options open.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that alliances can shift and change depending on the circumstances.
It's like being a free agent in the world of power dynamics. You have to be willing to negotiate the best deal for yourself and to move on when the situation no longer serves you.
That's a great way to put it. Now let's move on to Law 21. Play a sucker. To catch a sucker, seem dumber than your mark.
Okay, this sounds like a reverse psychology tactic.
It's about using feigned ignorance to your advantage. By appearing less intelligent or savvy than your opponent, you can lull them into a false sense of security and make them underestimate you.
It's like the Trojan horse strategy. You appear harmless and unassuming, but you're actually hiding a powerful weapon inside.
Exactly. And we see a classic example of this in the story of Socrates, who often feigned ignorance to draw out his opponents and expose the flaws in their thinking.
Socrates was a master at playing dumb, but he was actually one of the most brilliant thinkers of his time.
It's a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that sometimes the most unassuming individuals are the most dangerous.
This brings us to Law 22. Use the surrender tactic. Transform weakness into power.
This law emphasizes the strategic use of surrender as a way to buy time, regroup, and ultimately regain the upper hand.
It's like the saying, he who fights and runs away lives to fight another day.
Exactly. And we see a great example of this in the story of the Viet Cong, who used guerrilla warfare tactics to defeat the much larger and better equipped American forces.
The Viet Cong were masters of turning their apparent weakness into a strategic advantage.
Exactly. They understood that sometimes the best way to win is to avoid direct confrontation and to wear down your opponent through attrition.
It's a reminder that power is not always about brute force. It's also about strategy, patience, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances.
Now let's move on to Law 23. Concentrate your forces.
This sounds like a military tactic.
It's about focusing your resources and efforts on a specific goal rather than spreading yourself too thin.
It's like the saying, Jack of all trades, master of none.
Exactly. And we see this principle at work in the story of Alexander the Great, who conquered vast empires by concentrating his forces and striking decisively at his enemy's weakest points.
Alexander was a master strategist. He knew how to choose his battles and how to deploy his resources effectively to achieve his goals.
Now let's move on to Law 24. Play the perfect courtier.
This sounds like a lesson in etiquette.
It's more than just knowing which fork to use. It's about understanding the subtle social dynamics of power and learning how to navigate those dynamics effectively.
So it's about being socially intelligent and knowing how to read the room.
Exactly. And it's about being adaptable and knowing how to adjust your behavior depending on the situation.
It's like being a chameleon. You have to blend in with your surroundings and adapt to the social environment to succeed.
That's a great analogy. Now let's move on to Law 25. Recreate yourself.
This sounds like a self-help mantra.
It's about the power of self-transformation. Greene argues that we are not limited by our past or by the circumstances of our birth. We have the power to reinvent ourselves and to create the life we want.
It's an empowering message, but it also sounds like a lot of work.
It is, but it's also incredibly rewarding. When we take control of our own destiny and actively shape our future, we become masters of our own lives.
Now let's move on to Law 26. Keep your hands clean.
This law emphasizes the importance of maintaining a positive public image and avoiding actions that could tarnish your reputation.
It's like the saying, don't get caught with your hand in the cookie jar.
Exactly. And it's about delegating tasks that could potentially backfire or damage your reputation to others.
So it's about protecting your brand and making sure that you're always seen in a positive light.
Precisely. Now let's move on to Law 27. Play on people's need to believe to create a cult-like following.
This sounds like a recipe for manipulation.
It's about understanding the human need for meaning and belonging and using that need to create a loyal following.
So it's about giving people something to believe in, something to be a part of.
Exactly. And it's about creating a sense of exclusivity and belonging.
It's like building a tribe of followers who share your vision and who are willing to go to bat for you.
That's a great way to put it. Now let's move on to Law 28. Enter action with boldness.
This sounds like a call to action.
It's about the power of decisiveness and taking calculated risks. Greene argues that boldness inspires confidence and respect, while timidity invites doubt and contempt.
It's like the saying, fortune favors the bold.
Exactly. And we see a great example of this in the story of Julius Caesar, who crossed the Rubicon River with his army, defying the Roman Senate and launching a civil war that ultimately made him the ruler of Rome.
Caesar's boldness was legendary. He was willing to risk everything to achieve his ambitions.
Now, let's move on to Law 29. Plan all the way to the end.
This sounds like a lesson in strategic thinking.
It's about anticipating potential obstacles and having a plan in place to overcome them.
It's like playing chess. You have to think several moves ahead and anticipate your opponent's responses.
Exactly. And we see a great example of this in the story of Hannibal, the Carthaginian general who crossed the Alps with his army, including elephants, to attack Rome from an unexpected direction.
Hannibal's strategic planning was incredible. He was thinking outside the box and coming up with creative solutions to seemingly insurmountable challenges.
Now let's move on to Law 30. Make your accomplishments seem effortless.
This sounds like a paradox. How can you make something seem effortless when it clearly took a lot of effort?
It's about presenting yourself as being in control and making it seem like you achieve great things with ease.
It's like a magician performing a complex illusion. They make it look so easy, but behind the scenes there's a lot of practice and skill involved.
Exactly. And we see a great example of this in the story of Leonardo da Vinci, who was a master of many disciplines, including art, science, and engineering. He made it all seem effortless, even though he clearly dedicated countless hours to honing his skills.
Da Vinci was a true Renaissance man. He was a genius at so many things, and he made it all look so easy.
Now let's move on to Law 31. Control the options. Get others to play with the cards you deal.
This sounds like a power move.
It's about framing the situation in a way that limits the choices available to your opponents, forcing them to play by your rules.
It's like setting a trap. You create a situation where your opponent has no choice but to walk into it.
Exactly. And we see a great example of this in the story of Henry Ford, who revolutionized the automobile industry by offering customers a limited number of options for the Model T car. He famously said, "You can have any color as long as it's black."
Ford understood that by limiting choices, he could streamline production and keep costs down, which ultimately made the Model T affordable for the masses.
Now let's move on to Law 32. Play to people's fantasies.
This sounds like a lesson in marketing.
It's about understanding people's desires and aspirations and creating a narrative that taps into those desires.
It's like selling a dream. You're not just selling a product or an idea, you're selling a vision of a better future.
Exactly. And we see a great example of this in the story of Walt Disney, who created a magical world of entertainment that captured the imaginations of people of all ages.
Disney was a master storyteller. He understood the power of fantasy to transport people to another world and to create an emotional connection with his audience.
Now let's move on to Law 33. Discover each man's thumbscrew.
This sounds a bit sinister.
It's about identifying people's weaknesses and using those weaknesses to your advantage.
So it's about finding people's pressure points and applying leverage when necessary.
Exactly. And it's about understanding people's motivations and what makes them tick.
It's like being a detective. You have to gather clues and piece together a profile of your target to figure out what makes them vulnerable.
That's a great analogy. Now let's move on to Law 34. Be royal in your own fashion. Act like a king to be treated like one.
This sounds like a lesson in confidence.
It's about projecting an aura of authority and self-belief that inspires respect and admiration in others.
It's like the saying, fake it till you make it. But in this case, it's about believing in yourself and your own worthiness to command respect.
Exactly. And it's about behaving in a way that is consistent with the image you want to project.
So it's about walking the walk and talking the talk.
Precisely. Now let's move on to Law 35. Master the art of timing.
This sounds like a lesson in patience.
It's about understanding the importance of timing and knowing when to act and when to wait.
It's like surfing. You have to wait for the right wave and then paddle like crazy to catch it.
Exactly. And we see a great example of this in the story of Tokugawa Ieyasu, who patiently bided his time and allowed his rivals to weaken themselves before seizing power in Japan.
Ieyasu was a master of patience and timing. He understood that sometimes the best course of action is to wait for the right moment to strike.
Now, let's move on to Law 36. Disdain things you cannot have. Ignoring them is the best revenge.
This sounds like a lesson in letting go.
It's about recognizing that there are some things you cannot control, and that focusing on those things will only lead to frustration and resentment.
It's like the saying, don't cry over spilled milk.
Exactly. And it's about focusing your energy on what you can control and letting go of the rest.
So it's about choosing your battles wisely and not wasting your energy on things that are beyond your control.
Precisely. Now let's move on to Law 37. Create compelling spectacles.
This sounds like a lesson in showmanship.
It's about understanding the power of spectacle and using it to capture people's attention and imaginations.
It's like creating a fireworks display. You want to create something that is visually stunning and emotionally impactful.
Exactly. And we see a great example of this in the story of Queen Elizabeth I, who used elaborate processions and ceremonies to reinforce her authority and to inspire awe and loyalty in her subjects.
Queen Elizabeth was a master of spectacle. She understood the power of symbolism and the importance of creating a lasting impression.
Now let's move on to Law 38. Think as you like, but behave like others.
This sounds like a lesson in conformity.
It's about recognizing that while it's important to think for yourself, it's also important to conform to social norms and expectations to avoid alienating others.
So it's about fitting in while still standing out.
Exactly. And it's about understanding the unwritten rules of social interaction and following those rules to avoid causing offense or creating unnecessary friction.
It's like knowing the dress code for a party. You want to fit in with the crowd, but also express your own individual style.
That's a great analogy. Now let's move on to Law 39. Stir up waters to catch fish.
This sounds like a lesson in chaos theory.
It's about using disruption and uncertainty to your advantage. When things are stable and predictable, it's difficult to make significant gains. But when there's chaos and confusion, it creates opportunities for those who are willing to take risks and seize the moment.
It's like fishing in a muddy pond. You're more likely to catch fish when the water is stirred up and the fish are disoriented.
Exactly. And we see a great example of this in the story of Otto von Bismarck, who used a series of calculated provocations and military conflicts to unify Germany under Prussian leadership.
Bismarck was a master of realpolitik. He was willing to use any means necessary to achieve his goals, and he wasn't afraid to shake things up to get what he wanted.
Now let's move on to Law 40. Despise the free lunch.
This sounds like a lesson in financial prudence.
It's more than just avoiding freebies. It's about recognizing that everything has a cost, even things that appear to be free.
It's like the saying, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Exactly. And it's about being aware of the strings that are often attached to gifts and favors.
So it's about being discerning and making sure that you're not getting into a situation where you owe someone a favor that you can't repay.
Precisely. Now let's move on to Law 41. Avoid stepping into a great man's shoes.
This sounds like a lesson in humility.
It's about recognizing that it's difficult to live up to the legacy of a great predecessor, and that trying to do so can set you up for failure. It's about recognizing that it's difficult to live up to the legacy of a great predecessor, and that trying to do so can set you up for failure.
It's like trying to fill the shoes of Michael Jordan. No matter how good you are, you're always going to be compared to the original, and you're likely to fall short.
Exactly. And it's about finding your own path to success rather than trying to imitate someone else.
So it's about being inspired by great people, but also forging your own unique identity and legacy.
Precisely. Now let's move on to Law 42. Strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter.
This sounds like a military tactic.
It's about targeting the leader of a group to demoralize and disorganize the followers.
It's like cutting off the head of a snake. If you can eliminate the leader, the rest of the group will become disorganized and ineffective.
Exactly. And we see a great example of this in the story of Alexander the Great, who defeated the Persian Empire by targeting its leader, Darius III.
Alexander understood that by defeating Darius, he could demoralize the Persian army and pave the way for a swift victory.
Now let's move on to Law 43. Work on the hearts and minds of others.
This sounds like a lesson in persuasion.
It's about understanding people's motivations and using that understanding to win their support and loyalty.
So it's about appealing to both their heads and their hearts.
Exactly. And it's about creating a shared vision and inspiring people to believe in something larger than themselves.
It's like building a movement. You need to rally people around a common cause and motivate them to take action.
That's a great way to put it. Now let's move on to Law 44. Disarm and infuriate with the mirror effect.
This sounds intriguing. What's the mirror effect?
It's about mirroring your opponent's behavior to disarm them and make them question their own perceptions.
So it's like holding up a mirror to their soul and making them confront their own flaws and contradictions.
Exactly. And it can be incredibly effective in throwing people off balance and making them doubt themselves.
It reminds me of that scene in the movie Taxi Driver, where Robert De Niro's character confronts a politician in a mirror, forcing him to see himself through the eyes of his critics.
That's a great example. And it illustrates how mirroring can be used to expose hypocrisy and to make people question their own beliefs and actions.
Now let's move on to Law 45. Preach the need for change, but never reform too much at once.
This law emphasizes the importance of gradual change. People are naturally resistant to change, especially when it's sudden or dramatic.
It's like trying to turn a battleship around. It takes time and careful maneuvering.
Exactly. And we see a great example of this in the story of Otto von Bismarck, who gradually unified Germany through a series of calculated steps rather than trying to force change overnight.
Bismarck understood that change is a process, and that it's important to build consensus and to bring people along with you rather than trying to force them to accept something they're not ready for.
Now let's move on to Law 46. Never appear too perfect.
This sounds counterintuitive. Isn't the goal to strive for perfection?
Greene argues that appearing too perfect can make you seem unapproachable and even threatening.
So it's about letting your guard down a little and showing your human side.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that everyone has flaws and that trying to hide those flaws will only make you seem insincere.
It's like the saying, to err is human. We all make mistakes, and it's important to be able to acknowledge our imperfections.
Now, let's move on to Law 47. Do not go past the mark you aimed for. In victory, learn when to stop.
This sounds like a lesson in self-control.
It's about recognizing that success can be fleeting and that pushing your luck too far can lead to disaster.
It's like gambling. You might win a few hands, but if you keep betting everything you have, you're bound to lose it all eventually.
Exactly. And we see a great example of this in the story of Napoleon Bonaparte, who achieved incredible military victories but ultimately overreached and was defeated at the Battle of Waterloo.
Napoleon's ambition ultimately led to his downfall.
Now we've come to the final law, Law 48. Assume formlessness.
This sounds a bit abstract. What does it mean to assume formlessness?
It's about being adaptable and flexible, like water.
So it's about going with the flow and adjusting your approach to fit the circumstances.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that rigidity and dogma can be liabilities in a world that is constantly changing.
It's like the saying, the only constant is change.
Precisely. And we see a great example of this in the story of Bruce Lee, who developed a martial arts philosophy that emphasized adaptability and fluidity. He famously said, "Be like water making its way through cracks. Do not be assertive, but adjust to the object, and you shall find a way around or through it. If nothing within you stays rigid, outward things will disclose themselves."
Lee's philosophy is a reminder that we need to be open to new ideas and approaches, and to be willing to adapt to changing circumstances to succeed.
Now, having explored all 48 laws of power, let's shift gears a bit and discuss a recurring theme in the source material: the importance of mastering our emotions.
Yes, this seems crucial in navigating the complexities of power. The sources often caution against being ruled by our emotions, especially anger and fear.
Exactly. Uncontrolled emotions can cloud our judgment and make us vulnerable to manipulation. There's a story in the source material that really struck me about a young man named Caius Marius. He was captured by his enemies and was about to be executed when he stared down the executioner, saying, "Fellow, do you dare kill Caius Marius?"
That's terrifying, but also incredibly bold. What happened?
The executioner was so shaken by Marius's audacity and lack of fear that he fled. Marius later used this experience to motivate his troops, inspiring them with his courage and unwavering spirit.
It's a powerful reminder that controlling our fear can be a source of strength even in the face of danger.
Absolutely. And it connects to another recurring theme, strategic generosity. It's not just about being nice, it's about using generosity as a tool to build relationships, earn loyalty, and achieve your goals.
I recall the story of the Baron de Rothschild, who used strategic generosity to overcome social barriers and gain acceptance in French society. His lavish parties and philanthropic endeavors created a sense of obligation and indebtedness among those he wished to influence.
That's a perfect example. Rothschild understood that generosity is a powerful form of social currency. It's about creating a sense of reciprocity and building a network of allies who feel indebted to you.
It's like investing in social capital. You're building relationships and goodwill that you can leverage later on.
Exactly. And it's not just about grand gestures, it can also be about smaller acts of kindness and consideration that demonstrate your concern for others.
It's about being thoughtful and strategic in how you use your resources to build relationships and influence others.
Now let's delve into a fascinating aspect of power dynamics, navigating periods of transition or upheaval. The sources suggest that these times of change can create both opportunities and risks.
This resonates with our current times. We're living in an era of rapid technological advancements, political polarization, and social unrest. How can we apply these insights to navigate this turbulent landscape?
One key takeaway is the importance of adaptability. We can't cling to outdated strategies or assumptions. We need to be flexible and willing to adjust our approach as circumstances change.
It's like surfing. You have to constantly adjust your balance and position to ride the wave, or you'll get wiped out.
A perfect analogy. The story of Empress Wu, the only woman in Chinese history to rule as emperor, perfectly illustrates this. She rose to power during a period of great upheaval and was able to maintain her position through a combination of ruthlessness, political savvy, and an uncanny ability to adapt to changing circumstances.
It's inspiring to see how she defied societal expectations and rose to the highest position of power, despite facing tremendous obstacles.
Her story is a reminder that even in the most challenging circumstances, it's possible to not only survive, but to thrive.
Now, shifting gears a bit, the sources also delve into the power of creating a sense of mystery and intrigue.
This relates to one of the 48 laws we discussed earlier. Always say less than necessary. The idea is that by withholding information strategically, you create a sense of curiosity and desire.
It's like a movie trailer that gives you just enough glimpses to pique your interest, but leaves you wanting more.
Exactly. And we see this principle at work in the story of Cleopatra, who was a master of seduction and intrigue. She carefully cultivated an aura of mystery and allure that captivated some of the most powerful men of her time.
Cleopatra's story is a reminder that power is not always about brute force. It can also be about charm, charisma, and the ability to create a compelling narrative.
Now let's talk about a particularly challenging aspect of power dynamics, negotiating with those who hold more power than we do.
This is something we all face at some point in our lives, whether it's negotiating a salary with our boss or trying to persuade a client to sign a deal. What insights do the sources offer for navigating these asymmetrical power dynamics?
One key takeaway is the importance of focusing on creating value for the other party.
So it's about finding a win-win solution.
Exactly. When we focus on creating a mutually beneficial outcome, we're more likely to achieve our goals and build a strong relationship in the process.
It reminds me of the story of Nikola Tesla, the brilliant inventor who was able to secure funding for his groundbreaking work by convincing investors of the potential value of his inventions. He wasn't just asking for money, he was offering them a chance to be part of something truly revolutionary.
That's a great example. Tesla understood that to persuade those with more power, you need to demonstrate how their interests will be served.
It's about aligning your goals with theirs and making it clear that their support will benefit them in the long run.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about a particularly delicate aspect of power dynamics: managing our interactions with superiors or those in positions of authority.
This is a constant balancing act.
Huh.
We need to show respect for those in authority, but we also need to advocate for ourselves and our ideas. How can we find that sweet spot?
One key takeaway is the importance of recognizing that superiors are not infallible. They are human beings with their own strengths, weaknesses, and blind spots.
It's easy to get caught up in the aura of authority and forget that those in power are just as human as the rest of us.
Exactly. And the key is to approach these relationships with a healthy dose of respect, but also with a willingness to question assumptions and challenge the status quo when necessary.
This reminds me of the story of Michelangelo, who deftly handled a disagreement with his patron, Lorenzo de' Medici. He didn't directly challenge de' Medici's authority. Instead, he used his artistry to persuade him to see his point of view.
That's a brilliant example. Michelangelo understood that sometimes the most effective way to influence those in power is through indirect means, rather than through direct confrontation.
It's about being strategic and tactful in how you approach these relationships.
Now, let's talk about a particularly dangerous aspect of power dynamics: the temptation to become corrupted by power.
This is a classic theme in literature and history, isn't it? The idea that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. How can we guard against this temptation and maintain our integrity even as we gain power and influence?
One key takeaway is recognizing that power is a double-edged sword. It can be used for good or evil, and the more power we have, the greater the potential for harm.
It's like having a loaded gun. It's a powerful tool, but it can also be incredibly dangerous if it's not handled responsibly.
Exactly. And the key is to develop a strong ethical framework and to be constantly vigilant against the temptation to abuse our power.
It's about remembering that power is a privilege, not a right, and that it comes with responsibilities.
One key takeaway is recognizing that power is a double-edged sword. It can be used for good or evil, and the more power we have, the greater the potential for harm.
It's like having a loaded gun,
Yeah,
right? It's a powerful tool, but it can also be incredibly dangerous if it's not handled responsibly.
exactly. And the key is to develop a strong ethical framework and to be constantly vigilant against the temptation to abuse our power.
Yeah, it's about remembering that power is a privilege, not a right, and that it comes with responsibilities.
Now, let's talk about a particularly challenging aspect of the power game: navigating periods of transition or upheaval.
Well, this is something we all face at some point in our lives, right? Whether it's a career change, a relationship breakdown, or just a major life event. What insights do the sources offer for navigating these transitions successfully?
One key takeaway is the importance of embracing change. We can't cling to the past or resist the forces of change. We need to be open to new possibilities and willing to adapt.
It's like being flexible and resilient, like a willow tree bending in the wind.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that change can be an opportunity for growth and transformation.
Yeah, it's about seeing the silver lining in the cloud, even when things feel chaotic and uncertain.
Now, let's talk about a powerful strategy for gaining an advantage in the power game: cultivating a sense of unpredictability.
That sounds intriguing. How can unpredictability be an asset?
By being unpredictable, you keep your opponents off balance. They can't anticipate your moves, which gives you that element of surprise.
It's like playing poker with someone who has a great poker face. You can't read their tells, so you're constantly guessing what their next move will be.
Exactly. And we see a great example of this in the story of Steve Jobs, who was notorious for his unpredictable behavior and his ability to keep his competitors guessing.
Yeah, Jobs was a master of innovation and disruption. He was constantly pushing the boundaries and changing the game, which made it so difficult for his rivals to keep up.
Now, let's talk about a particularly challenging aspect of power dynamics: dealing with those who are ruthless and unyielding.
This is a really tough one. It's hard to know how to respond when someone's being aggressive or manipulative. What guidance do the sources offer for handling these situations effectively?
One key takeaway is recognizing that there are times when it's necessary to fight fire with fire.
So it's about standing up for yourself and not letting people walk all over you.
Exactly. And it's about setting clear boundaries and not being afraid to assert yourself.
But how do we balance this need for self-preservation with our desire to be ethical and compassionate?
It's a delicate balance, for sure, and there's no easy answer. But I think the key is to act with integrity and to always strive to do what's right, even when it's difficult.
It's about finding that middle ground between being a pushover and being a bully.
Exactly. Now let's talk about a particularly sensitive topic: The use of seduction and manipulation in the power game.
Ooh, this is a slippery slope. It's so easy to see how these tactics can be used for unethical purposes. How can we navigate this terrain in a way that's both effective and, morally sound?
One key takeaway is recognizing that seduction and manipulation are not inherently evil. They are simply tools that can be used for good or evil, depending on the user's intentions.
It's like a knife, right? It can be used to prepare a delicious meal or to commit a violent crime.
Exactly. And the key is to use these tools ethically and responsibly, always with the goal of creating a win-win situation rather than exploiting or harming others.
It's about remembering that true power lies in using our influence to help others, not to harm them.
Now, let's talk about a powerful strategy for influencing others, appealing to their emotions.
This makes total sense. We often make decisions based on our feelings rather than on cold, hard facts. How can we use this understanding of human psychology to our advantage?
One key takeaway is recognizing that emotions are powerful drivers of human behavior. When we can tap into people's emotions, we can kind of bypass their rational mind and connect with them on a much deeper level.
It's like speaking the language of the heart rather than the language of the head.
Exactly. And we see a great example of this in the story of Martin Luther King Jr., who used his powerful oratory skills to inspire a nation to embrace the dream of racial equality.
Oh, King's speeches were so moving. He was able to tap into people's deepest desires for freedom, justice, and equality.
Now, let's talk about a particularly delicate aspect of power dynamics, managing our reputation.
This is so important. Our reputation can open doors or it can slam them shut. How can we cultivate a strong, positive reputation that really supports our goals and aspirations?
One key takeaway is recognizing that our reputation is built on our actions and behaviors. We can't simply create a false persona or pretend to be someone we're not. Our true character will eventually shine through.
Right. It's like trying to build a house on a foundation of sand. It might look impressive at first, but it will eventually crumble.
Exactly. And the key is to live our lives with integrity and to be mindful of how our actions impact others.
Yeah. It's about doing the right thing, even when no one is watching.
Now, let's talk about a powerful strategy for wielding power, creating a sense of awe and wonder.
Okay, this sounds like something out of a fairy tale.
It's about understanding the power of spectacle and using it to create a sense of amazement and inspiration.
Oh, it's like creating a fireworks display.
Hmm.
You want to create something that is visually stunning and emotionally impactful.
Exactly, and we see a great example of this in the story of the ancient Egyptians, who built massive pyramids and temples that inspired awe and wonder in those who beheld them.
And those structures are still standing today. Testament to the power of creating something that transcends time and inspires generations to come.
Now let's talk about a particularly challenging aspect of power dynamics, maintaining our power and influence in the face of shifting alliances and changing circumstances.
This is a constant challenge in the game of power, isn't it? Alliances can shift, circumstances can change, and we have to be prepared to adapt our approach to maintain our position. What insights can we glean from the sources for navigating these complex dynamics?
One key takeaway is the importance of adaptability and strategic maneuvering. We can't simply cling to the past or assume that what worked yesterday will work today. We need to be constantly reassessing the landscape and adjusting our strategy.
It's like sailing a ship. You have to constantly adjust the sails and steer the ship to navigate the changing winds and currents.
Exactly. And we see a great example of this in the story of Abraham Lincoln, who skillfully navigated the political landscape during the tumultuous years of the Civil War.
Yeah, Lincoln was a master of diplomacy and persuasion. He was able to hold the Union together despite tremendous pressure and opposition.
Now let's talk about a powerful strategy for influencing others, mastering the art of timing.
This sounds like a lesson in patience.
It's about understanding the importance of timing and knowing when to act and when to wait.
It's like surfing. You have to wait for the right wave and then paddle like crazy to catch it.
Exactly. And we see a great example of this in the story of Nelson Mandela, who waited patiently for decades for the right moment to strike a blow against apartheid in South Africa.
Oh, Mandela's patience and perseverance were incredible. He knew that timing was everything and that rushing into action could really backfire.
Now, let's talk about a particularly challenging aspect of power dynamics, managing the expectations and demands of those who depend on us.
This is something we all face in our lives, right? Whether it's at work, in our families, or in our communities. What insights can we glean from the sources for handling these situations effectively?
One key takeaway is the importance of setting clear boundaries and managing expectations.
So it's about being assertive, and not letting people take advantage of our generosity.
Exactly. And it's about being clear about what we are willing to do and what we are not willing to do.
It's about finding that balance between being supportive and being taken advantage of.
Precisely.
Wow, this has been an incredibly insightful conversation. I feel like we've just barely scratched the surface of this complex and fascinating topic.
I agree. But hopefully, we've provided our listener with some valuable tools and insights that they can use to navigate the dynamics of power in their own lives.
Absolutely. So what's the one key takeaway you really want our listener to remember from this deep dive?
I think the most important lesson is that power is not a fixed entity. It's a dynamic force that is constantly shifting and evolving. Those who succeed at the game of power are those who are adaptable, strategic, and willing to learn and evolve.
It's about understanding the rules of the game, knowing how to play it effectively, but also staying true to our values and using our influence for good.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that power is a tool that can be used to build or to destroy, and that we have a responsibility to wield it wisely and ethically.
Well, on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us on this fascinating exploration of power dynamics. We hope you've enjoyed the journey.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing the boundaries of your own understanding.